Hello, and welcome to the Nerds Now Playing podcast, a podcast where we talk about all things nerdy, including movies, video games, and entertainment. This was recorded at the Feely Creative Studio in Salina, Kansas. I'm your host, Devin, and with me for the first time is...
Sydney.
Hello, Sydney. Welcome to our podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
So tell us, what do you do professionally, and where are your nerdy sensitivities? Tell us about what makes you nerdy enough to be on this podcast.
So I am Feely Creative's business director. I do all things basically admin for Feely here. And my nerdiness, I am a huge Harry Potter fan, Star Wars, and lately it's been like Disney princess, just because my daughter, we've been getting back into that. But I have an extensive knowledge of Harry Potter, so if anyone ever, has any questions, just let me know.
Now, have you read all the books then too?
I read all the books.
And watched all the movies
And I've watched all the movies.
Have you seen that spin-off series, Fantastic Beasts?
I have. I'm not super into the spin-offs. I am a diehard originals fan.
Okay.
I have read the books probably at least 50 times each, and that's no joke. I've listened to them. I love the audiobooks. I'm obsessed with the audiobooks. And so for like a few years, I would only fall asleep to the first Harry Potter book on audio. So I'm a huge Harry Potter fan.
Now, do you have a favorite book, and is it different than a favorite movie? Do you have a favorite movie in the series too?
That's really hard. So my favorite book of all time is probably the fourth book or the last book, the seventh book. But I don't like the fourth movie because they leave out half the book. And I think I love the last movie or technically it'd be the last two movies because they at least split up the last book into two different. So you could really kind of get the basis of it. Yeah, that's kind of the first movie and the first book almost go hand in hand. There's a little bit of movie magic that's involved, but also like with the first movie, the last, I think, 4 books or 3 books haven't even been written yet when that movie came out.
Right.
So it was always like a progression.
I've always liked the first book a lot. I thought it did feel very magical kind of reading it. Harry being a little kid, and it just felt really fun to jump into that world, and everything was so new and getting into that book series. And I liked the second book and the third book. As far as the movies go, I don't know if I have a favorite per se. I did like the first 2, directed by Chris Columbus. And the third one was very good too. And I think I liked one of the later ones too, like 4 or 5. In the middle movies weren't as strong for me, I guess, as a watcher of the movies, but still like the Harry Potter series as a whole. I saw the last 2 in theaters, and I can't say that about the other ones because we just weren't really big Harry Potter readers in the family growing up, but I did see the last 2 in the theaters, and that was a big deal because that was the end of the movie series. So that was a cool thing to watch. So
yeah, we would be here all day if I went into all the details. So I'm going to spare you, but
okay,
we can get on to our topic because I have a whole brain full of Harry Potter knowledge.
Well, one of the little topics that we also have is we like to talk about what we've been watching for the week. And if you've been watching anything, have you been watching anything this week?
I love horrible reality TV.
Okay,
so I love
me too.
American Idol and was it Top Level Chef or Level Chef or whatever Gordon Ramsay produces. I always watch, but a lot of it's like background. I don't really pay attention to it. So like I started watching the latest American Idol episode, and like I got like 10 minutes through, and then I had to go do something else. But Yeah. That's normally what's on in the background.
Good casual TV to maybe put on and
Mhm.
watch. We've been watching some reality TV ourselves, watching Love is Blind on Netflix that just came out. And that's a train wreck of a show. If you've ever, I don't know if you've ever seen
No.
any of those seasons, but they call it an experiment, but it's not a very good one. All the male contestants and the female contestants, they don't see each other. They all go on dates where each one is in a room that's divided by like a wall that they can't
Mhm.
see past. It might be a glass wall well, that's not glass, but
I got
it's
you.
a frosted glass
Yeah.
window that they can't see through, and they go on these dates where they just talk about themselves, and then they have to make a decision if they're going to start dating exclusively or not, or ultimately propose to one another without seeing each other. And then once they do propose to each other, then they get revealed to each other. They get to see each other, and all that. So we're on season 4 right
Oh
now.
my gosh, there's 4 seasons of this crazy?
Uh-huh. So it's a lot of binge watchable TV
Oh,
of this
jeez.
trash. And
This
each
trash.
season has gotten a little more less refined than the last, I think. But
Mm.
some of the when you watch this as a viewer, you see all the details all in front of you, and
Mhm.
the castmates in the show, they don't have all the information that you do as a viewer. So you're constantly like, don't date him, man. Or don't date girl, get out of there, get out of there. He's playing with you. So we've been kind of addicted to that show. But Netflix released the first half of the season this last week,
Mm.
with unknowingly to us, because we were planning on just dedicating the whole weekend last weekend to that. But they're going to release the final half of the season Friday, so that's what we're going to be doing Friday and Saturday, unfortunately, with our lives, because it's terrible. Um, but other than that, we did go to the movies and we saw the newest John Wick movie, John Wick 4.
I haven't seen any of those movies.
Oh, then we have a lot less to talk about. But
I
for
love Keanu Reeves though.
um, well, then you'd probably like at least the first John Wick. It has the most story, I guess, in here. But
Yeah.
it's been a very huge movie franchise now, with this action movie franchise with Keanu Reeves, and
Is it so there's 4 obviously John Wicks. Is it
uh-huh,
like the what's the Tom Cruise franchise?
Mission Impossible.
Mission Impossible. Is it as cheesy as that, or is it like I feel like some of these movies just get so exhausted. I don't know. Again, I haven't seen any of these, so I have no room to talk, but
Well, that's curious. I would not call the Mission Impossible movies cheesy, but they are, each one's a little more ridiculous than the last. Well, in some ways, I thought Mission Impossible movies, those movies, I think are like I thought third one was kind of okay. I thought four was a step up in quality
mm.
all across the board, and I really liked five. And I don't remember the names of these things though. There's so many of them, and we did see six, and I thought it was probably about as good as five, but five really stood out. Can't really remember why per se. There's some sequences, and there are sequences in both John Wick and Mission Impossible movies where each new movie they kind of try to outdo that. They raise the stakes a little bit. And as far as Mission Impossible goes, I really like. I wonder if you seen all of them, the recent ones.
I haven't seen any.
You haven't seen any Mission Impossible movies. Oh,
None.
so how do you even know they're cheesy?
Just word of mouth, and I'm just not a huge Tom Cruise fan.
um,
So, like, I watched the new Top Gun Maverick movie. I mean, obviously, just because I love the original Top Gun movie. And so I don't know. I just think Tom Cruise is very cheesy for some reason. And I
that's
don't
fair.
have any reason behind it either, but
Well, he's a friend of mine just sent me a TikTok, and it's not of actually, it's their people playing Tom Cruise,
mhm.
and Tom Cruise says he's going to do this big action scene, something. Other character, the bad guy is going to hit him with a bat in the head, and right before they do that, they call cut. But Tom Cruise is like, "No, I want to do this. I want to do this for the reality." And the director's like, "No, we can't do it. That's too dangerous." Like he's like, "I'm Tom Cruise. I'm in Scientology. We're doing this movie. We're going to do this. Call action, call action." And they beam him in the head, and then they do another scene, and he's like, "No, I'm Tom Cruise. I'm in Scientology. We're call action. We're doing this." So Tom Cruise, yeah, he's kind of a little bit of a I don't know. He's a goofy guy. He's a goofy guy with the Scientology and all that. But I think Mission Impossible movies are worth checking out.
Okay.
You should
Maybe
probably
I'll
check
at
them
least
out.
watch
But
one.
yeah, at least watch 4, 5, 6. And then the first one's pretty good too. But well, John Wick movies. So John Wick is a former assassin, and he in the first movie they through a sequence of events they kill his dog,
Oh,
and
that's so sad.
which his puppy dog, which is yeah, it is very sad. It's very it's very dramatic for the audience too. But that sets off a chain of events where John Wick gets like revenge for that,
Mm.
and he they pull him back out of retirement or so. But each new movie kind of builds up on the lore of there's a a, a society of assassins in this world, and they have different gathering points and stuff. You learn about that through the movies, but we watched John Wick 4. It had even more action. It was a very long movie. One that I'd recommend anyone who's a fan of action to go check out. It was a really cool movie. And then I wanted to give a little shout out to the Showtime show Yellowjackets. Just came out with started season 2 this week. Have you heard of
I
Yellowjackets
have
before?
not.
It's another really good show. I'd recommend any fans of TV out there to try and watch. It's it's not like it's not an adaptation of any true story, but it's kind of based a little bit on. So I should say in the show, this girls' soccer team, high school soccer team, they are flying to a game and maybe a tournament or something. And I think they're in Canada. They're flying over
Mm.
Canada or something, but their plane crashes, and they crash in the forest of Canada somewhere, and they're stuck out there in the wilderness. And I think they're stuck in the show. They're stuck out there for a year and a half before they're ultimately found. But before they are found, and the show chronicles the crash, which happens in the mid 1990s, and
Mm.
then it also cuts to present day where some of the characters are now, but you don't see all the characters in present day that are present in the mid 1990s portion of the show. So there's a lot of mystery in the show as to who survived, what's going on, what's actually happening in the show, and they heavily imply that cannibalism was a big part of how they survived. So it's got some Lord of the Flies type elements into this show, which is
Interesting.
very very cool. But it's also just really well done. It's an intense show
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty graphic, and but what I really like is this mystery that they have. They imply like there could be like some kind of magic maybe, or some kind of voodoo type of things happening, um, something out of this world maybe, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not very clear on that. So but the characters in the present, there's also added mystery. So really cool characters going on that they have in the show. Really cool premise. One that I'd recommend checking out. But season 2 just started, and we just watched the first episode, so we're really excited about
Hmm.
that. Um, so if you haven't seen anything else or worth talking about, we could maybe move on to our next topic
Yeah.
here. So later in on the show today, we're going to be reviewing All Quiet on the Western Front, one
Mm-hmm.
of the Oscar-nominated movies from this year. Um, and so we were going to talk about battle scenes a little bit today. Um, All Quiet on the Western Front features several of them,
Mm-hmm.
but Sydney, do you have any battle scenes in movies that stand out to you?
Yeah, so I have two that like came to mind like right off the top of my hat. So I I love Boondock Saints.
Okay.
And so I know that's not like a war battle, but it's like kind of like a gang battle almost or a vigilante. So I love the hotel scene where they come through the ceiling and they get tangled up in this rope that they've already fought about. So you get some humor based in it and they're tangled up in this rope. They're just like, okay, we're going to go with it. They start spinning and then you just see all these like slow motion, like boom, 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 boom. Everyone's going down,
Uh-huh.
blood's everywhere. And then they end up falling. And that's probably one of my favorite scenes. And then the other one that came to mind is the fight scene at the end of Bridesmaids, where
Okay. All right. Well,
where you have and I'm horrible with names, But basically, the two main characters, the two friends that are fighting this whole time, the one that's struggling, the one that's getting married, and the one that's struggling is just like tearing apart this bridal shower that this other extravagant friend made. And she's like throwing grass in the chocolate fountain, and she's like tearing up the giant cookie, and then they argue, and then it's just like a full-on like battle scene of just fury and frustration because you wish you could do that sometimes with your friends when your friends make you mad and you're just like, oh my gosh, I wish I could just pull your hair, but you can't. You can really only do that in the movies. And so those are my two faves. And I know they're not like battle related, but it's like a battle royale.
Well, all right. Well, I guess that's fair. I mean, I guess that opens up to other movies like maybe the battle scene in Anchorman could count for
Oh, I didn't even think
something
of
like that.
that.
Well, you should have,
I
cause
should have. That's a
but
good
but
one.
you didn't. Well, yeah, I guess that's not quite in the scope that I was thinking for
No.
battle scenes in movies, but I have seen Boondock Saints, and I do remember that scene in it. Boondock Saints worked the best for me the first time I watched it, and most of the second time. But
Mhm.
now I still like that movie a lot. But because the reason why it worked most for the first time I watched it because of how ridiculous every scenario
Mhm.
these two find themselves in. Um, it was just unlike anything I'd seen before for a while. Because I'm the beginning of the movie, they have this short bit. I think one of the main characters is handcuffed to the toilet,
Yes.
and he rips the toilet off out of the
Mhm.
ground the floor to escape, and I think he throws it out the
Yeah, he
window.
throws
And
it. Yeah. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
He throws it and he basically just lets go of it and it lands on the head of this guy that basically abducted his brother. So he's
Yeah,
saving his brother. And so the toilet falls on him, then he goes and gets his brother and they're in bathrobes. They are living in just filth and poverty and like I don't even think there's a full roof over their head. There's just mattresses on the floor and it's just one of those scenarios that is just so out of this world. You're just like, this doesn't make a dang bit of sense.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
um, I don't know. I love that movie.
Well, it's an honorable shout out there for Boondock Saints. So when I was thinking of battle scenes, though, I went a completely different direction than you did. So I was thinking of like a little bit more wartimey movies. But I don't know if I have a particular favorite battle scene, but there's two that generally stand out to me. And the first one is war related, and that's the opening to Saving Private Ryan.
It's been a hot minute since I've watched that movie, but yeah.
So that opening is the storming of Norm,
Normandy.
Normandy Beach.
Mm-hmm.
Can't talk today. That movie came out in 1998, and that was one of the craziest, one of the most accurate depictions of that time in World War II that I think we have seen at that point. Um, but the scale of that scene always stood out to me with all the troops um, just running into the open fire of the German
Mm-hmm.
soldiers, just lighting them up, and it's very horrific, and it's all kept at the point of view of the soldier, mostly Tom Hanks's character in that. But the intensity on that scene is so intense with the sound effects, the framing, and all
Mm-hmm.
the shaking camera, all that always stood out to me. So I always thought that was a very impressive battle scene in a in any kind of a movie. Um, the other one that kind of stood out to me was pretty much any of the battle sequence scenes in 300
Oh yeah.
really stood out to me. Uh, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but the Battle of Thermopylae.
I got nothing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either. But so that movie has a lot of slow motion sequences.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen 300?
I think I've seen parts of it. Sorry.
Oh man, that doesn't help. But
War movies are not my thing, so this is really out there for me. Like I love the historical part of war movies. I always fact check war movies to see if they're actually like historically accurate. That's the part that I love the most about them. So,
well,
Here in the control room, we just had to throw out that we believe that Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings is obviously the superior battle scene, but that's all.
never heard of it. Um, uh, so well, so 300 it takes a lot of liberties with the historical accuracy. So you shouldn't watch that movie with thinking that this is a depiction of what actually happened. But it is based on uh, the 300 Spartan soldiers that went up against the Persians in whatever year that was. But 300 is a very stylistic movie by Zack Snyder, who did the Batman v Superman movie and the Justice League that came out, which I'm guessing maybe you didn't see either.
The newest Justice League?
Yeah.
I actually think I did watch that
Okay.
once when it
Okay.
came out.
Well, that's Zack Snyder. I mean, 300, like that's not these types of movies aren't for everyone. I mean, I probably watch a war movie once a year because it sometimes can be really emotionally draining.
Yes.
But 300 is more just it's more an action and style than it is anything else, I would say. But when that movie came out, though, that has like Gerard Butler in it, has some other.
Well, geez, Gerard Butler. Like now
And-
I have to watch it because
Well-
he's half naked through the movie, isn't he?
Yeah, well, yes, and ripped. Everyone's ripped in that movie and overly muscular.
All right, sign me up.
So there might be something for you to enjoy in that movie. So, well, those were two movies that kind of stood out to me with a lot of battle scenes. And The Control Room was very correct. The whole Lord of the Rings series has a lot of epic battles, and the Battle of Helm's Deep is definitely a standout battle in that movie. Would you agree?
If we're going, well, I don't know. I would say the battle scene in the last Harry Potter movie when they're battling at the school is pretty, crazy because there's wands and not like swords and stuff. So,
Huh.
but
Huh.
anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
if we're gonna go that route,
Okay. Well, I don't know if I have anything else to talk about with
No.
battle scenes, but maybe now's a good time to get into our main topic today with our movie review. So we're going to take a little break before we get into our review of All Quiet on the Western Front. Hello and welcome back. So today we are going to be reviewing All Quiet on the Western Front. Let me read a little description about this movie. Set during World War I, it follows the life of an idealistic young German soldier named Paul Baumer. After enlisting in the German army with his friends, Baumer finds himself exposed to the realities of war, shattering his early hopes of becoming a hero as he does his best to survive. So this is another adaptation of the novel of the last couple days of World War I before Germany signs the armistice. Say that word right?
armistice.
Armistice with France. Sydney, what were some of your thoughts on this movie?
Well, I see movies in a very different light. As I loved this movie and I hated this movie. I love this movie in the fact that I was so incredibly impressed by costuming, their set design, their the acting was great. For clarification, this movie has been technically done twice, only by Americans. So this is the first time this movie has been done in Germany by Germans in like spoken German. The first movie came out in 1930s, and then there was a TV movie that came out in 1979. And both those movies, the American versions, won lots of awards. And so it was great that this version, the German version, also got nominated for some awards that we'll get into. But I did not like the fact that just everyone died, but and it was super emotional, and that was really hard for me throughout the movie because I'd get attached to someone and they would just not be there anymore. And so it's just all around, I had a lot of ups and downs with this movie.
Right. Yeah. Which is understandable because this is a very intense movie that it's about war, and it does not so the thing about this movie is it shows the tragedies of war, and it really does not glorify any aspect of it. And so so my takeaway with this movie is it has these themes of that war is nothing but loss,
Mhm.
and you see that through the entire runtime of this movie. And there are characters that there that you kind of grow attached to a little bit, and then they are gone after a while, like very soon
Mhm.
after, in very different ways, and not because not everybody dies exactly like on the battlefield either.
Mhm.
Um, so this entire movie is it shows you that this is a situation and a place that you do not want to be in, because this movie is dirty, it's gritty, you feel like you're there and wet, like everything's wet and dirty and muddy, and you feel that with all the characters. I don't there's some times when they're not on the battlefield, they are at their camps in between battles, where I guess they showered and I guess they cleaned
Yeah.
up.
So the historical part of that is, so these during the trench warfare, which is what this is called, is they would go in shifts. So you'd spend 7 days in the trenches, and you spend 7 days at a camp, and so that's where they clean up. They'd get some off time, but not always did that happen. Is where when your 7 days were up, well, it's raining the whole time. It's dirty. These trenches are falling through, so they may not have to be in battle, but they're repairing trenches. So there is kind of a little bit of disconnect between, oh yeah, they're in the trenches. Well, now they're in this beautiful, great area, and now they're back in the trenches. So I feel like there was a little bit of disconnect in the story that way. I didn't understand the reasoning behind that until I looked up the historical part of it after I
Mm,
watched this movie.
mm.
So anyway.
So, but I thought this movie was really great in the depiction of the characters, because when we start the movie, the characters have a really wide-eyed perspective of the world. They're very fresh. They have not seen the horrors of war. So the movie kind of centers around Paul and his friends. They enlist in the army, and I think they do that by they lie about their ages, I
Yes.
think. So they're younger than what's required to be in the army, because they really wanted to go and have an adventure. Basically, they want
Hmm.
to. They only know through maybe the propaganda from Germany that the heroics of war, they're going to do something honorable for their country, and so when they first starting a list, their mood is very upbeat, but that quickly changes to the nightmare as the movie
Hmm.
goes on. And I could feel that in every new scene that they were going through. Their situations did not improve at all
Yeah.
in this movie. So I thought it was very good, and the score of this movie also stood out and
Yes.
played toward that nightmarishness of this situation that they're in. Because when the characters are, um, I don't know if you would call it like their basic training part that they're in,
Hmm.
but they're depicted as being happy. But the score is telling you no, they're just marching on into a nightmare, whether they agree with that or not. Um, and so many different feelings going with this movie that were really powerful. So really good, I thought.
Yeah, I when you first hear those, so in the movie you hear the drum roll, the drum snaps.
Uh-huh.
And then that really grabs your attention. You're like, that doesn't fit here. And then you see the other drum snaps, and it's like that building, and then you hear these baritones sounds and these tubas, this meh, like almost like a horn,
Uh-huh.
like a foghorn almost. And it really draws your attention, like, oh my gosh, this is about to get really, really bad. But you're seeing on the screen, like, oh, these kids are like super happy. They're got caught up in the glorification of war and how they're gonna all come home, war heroes, which is obviously not the case. But and you hear those, and it's that I like that they carried those sounds throughout the movie. You didn't just hear those once in a very specific thing. That the score carried those. I want to say visual, but it's not visual. The audio portions of that throughout the movie. So
Uh-huh.
it was kind of a cue point, like, oh, I need to pay attention to this scene or things
Yeah.
like that.
It's kind of like this. It's almost like the score is just kind of the looming horror of war. It's like
Mhm.
that's just the sound of war that they're in. And even if they are having little moments of happiness or are removed from the trenches directly, that music is still looming over them because it's not over until it's over,
Mhm.
and they're always going to be sucked back into that one point. So it was a very interesting choice because it creates a lot of contrast with what you're seeing on screen sometimes, but it's always this sense of unease that you're watching or listening to.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Um, I I loved the opening. I was madly in love with the opening scene when we first watch it, which is the life cycle of the German uniform.
oh, good point. Yeah.
Yes. So you are opened up to this battle scene. You're following this soldier. You see him die. You see them stripping all of these dead soldiers of their uniforms. You're seeing them take their boots off, their coats, their shirts, they're all these different things. And then all of those war garbs, the uniforms, are then brought back to Germany or back to wherever their housing is, and they're getting washed, they're getting repaired, they're getting this whole thing in order to be reused for new soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually very historically accurate. And they also would, if they stumbled upon an ally soldier, they would strip them of their uniform too and recycle that, because during this part of the war, their supplies were depleted. They had no supplies. They were
Yeah.
cut off from I can't remember the specifics, but Britain, and they had no imports, they had no exports. They were using whatever they had. And so these uniforms were all wool. They were heavy. They withstand the cold relatively well, but it was just, I don't know, the life cycle of this uniform. I was just, it blew my mind, because then you see your main character get this
Yep.
uniform,
Uh-huh.
and they're like, well, this one's already taken. They're like, oh, it might have just been too small, rips the name tag out of it, when you know
Right.
what happened.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point to make because, and that's one that I had to think on a little bit as I was watching it to piece that together because we do open up with that other soldier
Hmm.
who was living in that uniform,
Yeah.
and things did not go well for him in the movie. But to see that circle back to the next recruits was very, man. It's just like it takes some a little bit out of you. It's another thing that shows you how useless and r- war is.
Hmm.
That theme is just because the book is very much has a anti-war story. It's
Yes.
an anti-war story. It's an anti-war message, and the way they seed that in throughout this movie is really brilliant with the uniform and the new
Hmm.
kids because every new wave of cadets that come in or whatever, they have just no idea, and they're always going to be fresh, but they're always going to end up the same.
Hmm.
They could end up in another as a body again.
Yeah. And they continued that sequence too into the dog tags. So the German dog tags, and this is actually semi-historically accurate too, because there's multiple different German dog tags, but part of them were they snapped off,
Uh-huh.
which I actually thought was pretty brilliant, because that way you're not trying to get them from around, the soldier's neck or whatever, but they snap off and you collect them. Well, Paul, the main character, the minute he gets in there, he's like, well, start collecting dog tags. It was a simple task that you can give someone that's new, but it's also very profound, and like, I am so new and now I have to collect all these bodies and their dog tags. How soon is that going to be me where someone is collecting mine? And then towards the end of the movie, you see kind of that same cycle too. They come back to that theme, and
Yeah, it's
it's the
true.
theme of being recycled, and how almost that the human aspect of it doesn't matter, but all the material things matter. And you see that life cycle throughout the movie that I really liked.
And another thing that stood out to me because those are the people on the front lines doing that work. And if
Mm-hmm.
someone dies, someone's just going to take their place,
Yeah.
and that cycle will just keep going. Meanwhile, that's contrasted with the generals who are living in like high society type of a lifestyle, or
Mm-hmm.
they're removed from the battlefield. They are in comfort of their living quarters, and they have the one general. I think he's a general.
I
I
think
mean,
so.
I excuse me if I don't know the military rankings. So excuse me for that. But they show the general. He's sending the boys off to war constantly.
Hmm.
Like they're like mad with honor for country and above, like nothing else. And but we see them feasting on good food, good rations of food, wine and stuff, and they are in their nice clean mansions or wherever they're housed.
Hmm.
I mean, it's very upper society kind of like, but then they always go back to the people on the front lines. They're in the mud, they're dirty, they're wet, they're cold constantly. And so there's like the generals just kind of don't see them as human
Hmm.
even. They are just a tool to a means to an end.
Yeah.
And that's also shown throughout the movie too, which is very haunting and shows that war is dumb.
Yeah. Very much so. I will go back to that costume part a little bit. In order to put in perspective, there was over, I believe, 800 to 900 costumes specifically made for this movie. They actually were made by a manufacturer. The costume designer actually had a shop in, I believe it was Prague.
Mm.
And like they had to hand make all the undergarments, all the shoes were custom made, the hats, the at the very beginning of the movie you see them in like their school garb, which is just their hats, their iconic red hats, and their suits, which is the only color actually. If you look kind of the color scheme of this movie, at the beginning of the movie, you see color, you see the colorful they have, and then when it starts getting down to the nitty gritty and they're in war, it's nothing but browns and grays and these kind of blues um, throughout the movie. But no, all those garments were custom made for this actual movie. 90% of the costuming was done specifically for this movie. Everything else would have been rented.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and with the costuming, there are, I can one thing about this movie, it's a very beautiful looking film.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed on our notes that, and was reminded the fact that it won for best cinematography.
Mm-hmm.
Was one of the things that it won the Oscars for. And when I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, because I forgot that it won best cinematography, but I was
Mm-hmm.
watching it on my television, and I think a nicer television, and I kept thinking like this looks really nice for being grungy and dirty and stuff, and so that kept standing out to me. But you mentioned the costumes because there is a sequence in the movie where Paul goes 1-to-1 with a French soldier,
Yes.
and it's a do or die situation. It's either him or
Or the French
or
guy.
the French guy. So they go into a one-on-one fight, and Paul ends up stabbing the French soldier multiple times. Um, but the French soldier does not die right away, and it's one of the most intense, heartbreaking scenes in the movie. But through that interaction, Paul does have a moment of because you just wanted him to die, and he was having probably a mental breakdown at that
Mm-hmm.
point, and just wanted him to shut up.
Mm-hmm.
But then Paul tries to help him, but then ultimately is too late for the Frenchman.
Right.
But before they helped, as he was helping him, he was trying to take his jacket off, which is buttoned up, and so he was cutting the buttons off.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a weird point to make in this moment, but that costuming there
Yeah, can you imagine if
was, yeah. Go ahead.
can you imagine reshooting that every single time where either you had to put on a new jacket with new buttons or you had to sew those buttons back on every time you needed to redo that scene?
Uh huh. So yeah, that scene had so many levels of complicated, like because there's the uh, French soldier's already dying, so
Mm-hmm.
he's choking on his blood, basically, and so that's happening. There's also the situation that Paul wants to save him now or
Mm-hmm.
try to help him. He even took off his helmet and called him comrade. So it was a very touching moment. And so you have all that, but then you have the details of the costumes, and then the everything else going on around them, and because there's still sounds of war over there and
Mhm.
stuff. So there's so much happening in this scene. It was probably one of my favorite. Well, it wasn't my favorite because it was so hard to watch,
Oh,
but it was so much going on. It's like this is masterful filmmaking going on right here.
and keep in mind also there's different levels of mud caking. So
Mm,
the makeup artist would have to constantly either recake the mud or make sure it was the same from the previous scene. And there's different like levels of mud. Like there's the clay, there's the actual mud, there's the dirt, there's like all these different levels of color and texture and thickness and that these makeup artists had to keep for every scene, which I was amazed about. That's just like a level of detail that I don't even want to think about in terms of just doing over and over again.
yeah, there's a movie poster for this film that I think has Paul half his face is
Mhm.
caked in mud, and watching the movie I kept waiting for that moment to happen, and but I kept not being sure if that was the moment I was watching because he's he's getting dirty in different ways at different points in this movie,
Mhm.
and I was like, well, maybe is that the caked in mud that I have in my mind from the trailer there or not? And but he I would not want like how could you make this movie? Because this to be dirty and cold like that all the time. But the makeup does stand out because he is so many different levels of dirty throughout this movie and caked in mud and stuff.
Mhm.
Because there was that in the trench, and there's an earlier part in the film where they're in the bunker and artillery shells
Yep.
are come basically rain from above,
Mhm.
and then he's trapped under the debris of some of that, and so he's another level of makeup and
Mhm.
being dirty in that scene too.
Well, in the trenches actually, so they dug all of those trenches for this movie. They did it outside of Prague and they built this set specifically for this movie and filmed there constantly. And so when they were doing these trenches, they actually had to make them wider in order to fit, 6 cast members plus the cameras. So, and they're a lot deeper in order to kind of make that connection between like you're literally like underground. Because normally they were not that deep or even that wide. But can you imagine working in these tiny, narrow spaces for months on end, you're in the mud, you're basically like claustrophobic almost in these trenches and trying to get these scenes over and over and over again. And luckily enough, part of the pre-production, your cast member went through basically boot camp. And they did all these different scenes. They practiced shooting the guns. They practiced wallowing in the mud. They did all these different things just to prep for this. And then you put them in costume and they have to do it all over again.
Hmm.
I can't be cold for more than 10 minutes. I cannot imagine being the cast and the crew of just always being wet and always being dirty throughout the filming of this movie.
Yeah, no, I have to go and I watched 1917 last year,
Mm.
and so that's also in World War One, and I might have to rewatch that again because I this movie, All Quiet on the Western Front, I feel like this is the most accurate depiction of what those trenches were
Mhm.
actually like. Because watching 1917, I just don't remember feeling as like I needed to take a shower after watching that movie. But so that's one of the things that really stood out in this movie was those trenches that they made, and the actors were just living in there
Mhm.
in that. So um, which all just goes back to the theme of war sucks, and it is not a place you want to be. And this movie, like kept honoring that idea over and over again.
You
One
ready?
thing I just
Oh.
want to throw out there, I'm sorry. We're fortunate to be very close to a museum in Kansas City called the World War One National Museum, um, and it gives amazing context to the bigger prices of the war. And these kinds of movies kind of show you what it was like to live the war as an individual. But there's real value in visiting a museum like that one, where it shows you like the awfulness of the big picture of the war too. So, and anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Fun fact, a lot of things were coined during the First World War One. So That's when they started using the term shell shock, which is
Mm.
present day PTSD. There was a thing called trench foot because it was so wet and so dirty that their feet were getting basically, I don't know, not necessarily rotten, but their circulation was poor. There's
Yeah.
pictures, historical pictures of men in hospital beds, and all of their feet are raised,
Hmm.
trying to get their circulation back. What was another one? There's the First World War that really tanks were used. This is like the first for a lot of things. So keeping that in mind, that they were able to really do all these different little bits in this movie, just to kind of set the tone for it, I was really impressed with.
Yeah, well, I think one of those, I don't know if that the term came from it, but I think trench foot
Yeah, trench foot.
was big. So they were constantly walking in those boots in
Mm-hmm.
water, submerged in water, so it'd make their feet really
Yes.
raw. And that was a huge problem in there. And
Mm-hmm.
I will now know that from watching this movie, because that of how those trenches were. Um, let's dive a little bit more into some of the characters and stuff in there.
Yeah.
And so well, I'll just go ahead and put this out there, just in case we hit some story beats. There might be some spoilers from like more so
Yeah,
than
more
more so.
so. Apologies, I kind of
We'll
went in
get
there.
let's talk a little bit more about some specific story beats that are happening in this movie. Um, so this movie starts with Paul and his friends enlisting in the army. So it kind of like gives you this impression that, because I've seen a lot of war movies and
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and then sometimes they focus on uh, a group of people who become friends or comrades with each
Mm-hmm.
other. They have that r- relationship that builds up between them, and that kind of like is showcased throughout the movie. But in this movie, that's kind of not. It does happen in the beginning, but things go south for everyone very quickly at
Very
different
quickly.
stages and for different reasons. But it just kind of keeps telling you how crazy this war situation is for both countries. So at the beginning, Paul's with his, I'll say like three other main friends that is
Mm-hmm.
in this movie, and early on, one of his friends friends are taken away from him. I believe it's Ludwig, um, is the first to go, and I think that's when the artillery shells hit the bunker.
Yeah. It's hard to keep all these in order because there's so many death scenes. And yeah, the artillery shells hit the bunker. Um he basically not necessarily gets blown up, but he's pretty dramatically torn apart. Um so they find his glasses first, and so that's when they know it's him because he. So at the beginning of this film, he just had regular glasses on, and when they went to go get their uniforms, they basically gave him rubber bands
Mm-hmm.
to put over his ears, and it had the glasses. And so, finding just those glasses with the rubber bands on them, you knew what happened because he was basically blind. He needed those glasses to see. So that was pretty tragic, and I think it really sets the tone of, oh my gosh, we're gonna die here, for the rest of the movie.
And that was an earlier death, I think,
Mm-hmm.
for him. And they were in those trenches, and they were experiencing the artillery fire for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
I think. And so they did not experience that very well emotionally. And the character of Ludwig, that really stood out to me because he like some of the other war movies that I've seen depicted, soldiers would call for their mothers when they're
Mm-hmm.
dying on the ground, and that's a horrible thought. And Ludwig's character was kind of having that. He wasn't calling for his mother or anything, but he was kind of having a mental snap,
Yeah.
and he wanted Paul to like not leave him, like not
Mm-hmm.
in all that, but then they got blown out of their trench hole, and and then he ended up dying. And uh, but but every death that kind of happens, it's it's almost it's almost communicated in a way that this is just going to happen no matter what,
Mm-hmm.
and there's just almost like nothing you can do. There's uh, a scene later in the movie where one of their comrades, Cat, is he loses a leg They
Mhm.
find out, and they find him amongst the other wounded soldiers, um, and he asks how high up his gunshot wound was to his leg, and
Mhm.
I don't remember if they lied to him or not, but they were telling Paul was telling him that's it's going to be fine,
Yeah.
and
Worse men have had worse wounds and they've come back from it.
I think Cat is already pieces together. They're going to take his leg, and that's
Mhm.
the last thing he wants to have happen because he says he doesn't want to live as a cripple. But Paul's trying to reassure him that it's not going to happen.
Mhm.
And then Paul goes and finds his other friend and tells him about Cat, and they bring him soup. Um, and the soup has they give him the soup with a fork and stuff. And
Which can we talk about that? Who eats soup with a fork?
uh, well, it had maybe beef chunks in it. Well, they needed him to have with a fork, I
I
guess. But
guess.
it's a good call out there. But that scene though is so unsettling. Like when I was watching it with my girlfriend,
Mhm.
and like when Paul and his friend turn away from Cat's lying on the ground with this fork in his hand,
Mhm.
and I'm telling my girlfriend like, "Oh no, no, they're gonna do something bad's gonna happen. I don't want to. I
I
know
hid
to."
under the blankets. I didn't watch that scene.
Uh,
I couldn't do it.
poor Cat takes his own life in that moment.
By stabbing himself with a fork. Just understand that you are stabbing yourself in the neck with a fork.
Yeah. But that's the way he wanted to die. He did not want to die as a cripple and have them take his legs. So he went out on his own terms, which is more than a lot of soldiers can
That's
say,
true.
I guess. But such a dark, horrible thing to witness in that movie,
Mhm.
and it just does not go well for everyone else either. And while this is all happening, and I might be explaining it wrong, but Germany is trying to get um, trying well what would we call them? They're trying to meet with the French commanders to
Mhm.
sign,
Basically a truce.
yeah, sign the truce. So that's happening. But up until that happens, they're still getting sent to war,
Mhm.
and it's not over until it's over again, I guess. But
Well, and because parts of Germany didn't want to end the war. They like some of the commanders who have been in this, and they didn't want to concede. They didn't want to lose, basically. And so the the armistice was signed, and fighting was supposed to stop, I believe, at 11 a.m. the next day or whatever the
yeah,
technical is. So instead of just not sending anyone to war or anyone to fight, they literally at like 10:45 a.m. was like, we're going to do this one last stand, and sent these poor soldiers into battle one last time. And I believe actually historically there are about 10,000 deaths within the last 2 days on both sides
wow,
because no one just stopped. And if they did stop, so a lot of German and British soldiers and French soldiers um, were killed by their own people because of desertion or cowardice or certain different reasons. They killed these soldiers for not fighting each other, basically. And what is now termed as PTSD is they didn't know how to deal with PTSD. They didn't have the resources, didn't have the knowledge. They didn't have any of this, so they killed their own soldiers in order to make them basically I don't know, there's a term I'm thinking of, but I can't think of it. So all the other soldiers will basically stand in line and be like, okay, I don't want to die that way. I at least die this way.
and that was depicted in the movie too,
Mm-hmm.
because when the before the 11 o'clock time, the everyone was gathered, and the
Mm-hmm.
general told them they're going to send them back out again, and some of them were saying like, "Oh, I'm not going back out there again."
Mm-hmm.
And then they're instantly grabbed and sent to the firing squad
Yeah.
right then and there. And so,
And everyone just turned around and marched back.
yeah, and yeah, for another horrifying scene, Paul, who we've been following for all this long, he has to be sent right back out there again, And I'm glad that they showed some of the French side at that point.
Mm-hmm.
They showed the French soldiers kind of just to them that's done. They're done. They're
Mm-hmm.
drinking some wine. They're defeated still. I mean, they're tired and exhausted, and they're just kind of like gathering their stuff. Meanwhile, Germany's advancing on them again
Mm-hmm.
through no man's land, and then they start hearing the rumble of the footsteps and stuff, and so then the French soldiers have to get right back to it with on their manning their guns and stuff, and um, which is insane since on the French line they have those I'm going to call them machine guns for lack of
Yeah.
or the turret guns,
Mm-hmm.
and running back into a turret gunfire for when they have like 10 minutes left until this is all done. Very horrifying situation for
Mm-hmm.
for the German soldiers, and um, it's just ridiculous. We, as a viewer watching it, like you just see how pointless this is.
Mm-hmm.
It's so pointless, and Paul is so close to whatever life and freedom that he will have after this, but he's been thrown back into this, and then he ends up getting in a fight with a French soldier in the trenches, and which ends with him going into one of those dugouts they have, and then he gets stabbed in the back by one of the French soldiers.
And that was the craziest thing is it was literally like to the minute they depicted this, and he literally dies like the next to German soldiers and French soldiers who are alive next to them. Like the buzzard sound, they're done fighting. They just sit down, and then Paul just he was literally like 30 seconds in.
Yeah, he was so close.
And that just killed me because like I was ready for the scenes of him going home in the aftermath and getting into the mental health part. Like I wish that would have been part of an ending, but apparently it's not. So
Yeah, yeah. So poor Paul, he did not make it, and it's such a sad situation on that, and they were so close. And I was thinking another part of that, outside of Paul, when they called the armistice, and was in effect when 11 o'clock came,
Mhm.
it's like everyone just kind of like chills, like
Yeah.
like. But then we see the German soldiers and the French soldiers. They don't just magically are separated.
No,
They're
they're
just
sitting right next to each
they're
other.
just yeah. It's just like now. It's just like
Finally, we're done.
another day
Yeah.
now. And so just what in the heck could that be like? I just have no idea. Because like up 5 minutes previously, it would have been okay to shoot one of them in the head or something, or they'd be trying to kill you, and then all of a sudden like nothing. Just gather your things. Anything from now on would be illegal or something.
Mhm.
Very haunting.
I would like to kind of move back to another theme. A very small theme of the movie is food.
Oh yeah.
Food again, Germany was cut off imports exports. They're working with very little. These soldiers are starving to the point where they're going to local French farms, stealing food. You see them peeling potatoes when they're not in the trenches. There's some dialogue that even comments about the food, how I'm tired of eating this, this, and this. There's a scene where when that very last part where they're invading the Francis trench, and they find the kitchen, and it's like
Yeah.
all this immaculate food. And this is again the only time really you see color at the end of this movie is in this kitchen. It's like, oh my gosh, they have fruit, they have vegetables, they have fresh bread, they have all these different things that we did not have, and they're stuffing themselves instead of like instead of killing people, they chose to eat.
That was another scene that really stood out to me. It was one of my favorites in the movie. It kind of made me think like I've never been in a situation they have been, but I have been in situations where I have been very hungry, and like I stumble across like a catered event and you load up on that. So I was right there with them, and they kind of did hit the mother load because they were eating well.
They
It
were eating
looked
real
like
good.
in that little moment, because they were stuffing their face with the
Mhm.
sausages, and I don't know, well, milk was there too,
Mhm.
and cheese, and then um, you're right. The color that came from that scene, I didn't. I guess I didn't even piece together the color, but you're right. It was the most color we had seen in a while there with that
Mhm.
food, and them just able to gorge themselves. And what I also liked about that scene, though, too, was because that scene happens, and then immediately after, that's when the tanks roll in for the first time,
Mhm.
and that at least in the movie, um, and as they're doing that, all the rats are leaving that, and
Oh,
there's this great shot, low
yeah.
angle of them still with food just still dropping out of their mouths still, but all the rats are just running out. So they
Mhm.
have this moment of um, this awesome moment where they can just gorge themselves real quick, and but that immediately has to end because they need to get the hell out of there because those tanks are rolling in
Mhm.
one of the craziest sequences in the movie when they because those tanks go over the trench
Mhm.
lines, and some people get crushed with that, like
Yeah. There's one like super gory scene where the tank dips into the trench a little bit, basically crushes this man to death. His head is crushed and then just goes right on over. And you're like, huh, that happened.
yep, that happened, and that happened immediately after the food thing. So there's like,
Yeah.
so even if they have a moment of good fortune, it's gonna only last for a
Mm-hmm.
minute because then it goes right back to hell
Mm-hmm.
for them from that moment on. So that really stood out to me, that moment there too. And you mentioned, yeah, the food did play a role, and food is what caused one of Paul's other friends to ultimately die too.
Mm-hmm.
They go to the farm and they steal for Paul. And it was Paul's turn, and he stole some eggs,
Mm-hmm.
and that ended up getting his friend also killed, because the farmer's we'll call him the farmer's son tracked him in through the woods and shot him.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happens too, it's like well, he's not even in actual battle, and
Yeah.
they can't catch a break. So it so really interesting how they depict all aspects of war in not just the soldiers' point of view, but even civilians in
Mm-hmm.
that whole that world. So, but no one catches a break in this movie. Um, well, Sydney, do you have any other final thoughts on the All Quiet on the Western Front?
I have a lot of thoughts, but like maybe next time we'll talk about the bathroom scene that like blew my mind too, because they're both just sitting on these outdoor toilets and having a conversation like nothing's happening and their pants are down, and you're like, what? They're literally just talking to each other on the toilet. But that's probably a whole nother conversation.
Well, I don't have anything to say specifically about that part, but leading up to that, what stood out to me is that because they were getting their mail
Mm-hmm.
and they were going through reading their mail, so they had this break, I guess. But out eh, out in the distance in the sky, there were two combat planes
Yes.
fighting, and so they're having like there's a whole other movie happening out in the skies out there. But for these two characters, like that's just happening out
That's
there.
just fine. That's
They're
whatever.
folks they're fixated on their letters and talk and
Mm-hmm.
using the bathroom. Meanwhile, there's that whole air battle going on with the fighter planes.
Mm-hmm.
So that stood out to me because they looked like a big deal to me, but they're just that's not. It's just war. Yeah, it happens. It's another day.
It's whatever.
Um, well, let's go ahead and give this movie a rating. We have our rating scale of avoid, meh, solid, great, or superb. Sydney, what would you, before we get into reasons why, but what would you rate this movie?
I'd give it a superb, mainly because you get a little bit of everything. You get multiple themes that you can pay attention to. You get the acting was amazing, considering a lot of these actors, it was their first big film. So they're very new. And then you also had a couple of faces even us like Americans can recognize, like Daniel Bruhl, who was from Inglourious Bastards.
Oh, okay.
And so it was good to actually have someone to recognize as an American, because all
Mm.
these German actors I didn't recognize. And then just overall, as a movie, yes, it's long, but it gets down into the detail, and they weren't afraid to show the realness of it.
Okay, that's a superb from Sydney. So I would give this movie a rating of superb as well. This is definitely a superb movie. The way it is shot, the production design, the costuming that you mentioned, everything is top notch in this movie. And just with the theme of like the horrors of war, war is pointless. Every aspect of this movie highlights that. And with poor Paul and all of his friends, it just seemed like no matter what they did, it didn't work out for them. That they were a victim of the situation that they were in constantly, and they being on the front line, and then there's somebody else, pulling the strings, and it's almost like they had no real decision in their destiny. It's just how it was for them. But really great movie with how the sound design and the music was so intense. And but I've never felt like I was kind of like in the trenches before, and it's since this movie. So this is probably one of my now top favorite World War One depicted movies, I think, in a while. So it was a very good movie. That made you feel all kinds of feelings, mostly sadness and terror. So, very good movie, and I can see why it earned the Oscars that did win, and it won for best score, best cinematography, best production design, and one that I'm very happy it won then for was best international feature.
Yes.
I think we had a lot of good international films this last year, with this movie being a German film, and I was going to say Everything Everywhere All at Once, but that's not true. I was thinking of the I don't know if it came out last year or the year before, but we had some good Korean thrillers come out recently with like Squid Games and so it's been a very good year for international films. So, and All Quiet on the Western Front was very, very well and very well deserved with all the awards that it won. So, well, I think that probably wraps up our time, though, with our movie review of All Quiet on the Western Front. So this was Nerds Now Playing. Sydney, is there anywhere else where we can see some of your work?
Yeah, you can check out our podcast called Silky Moms. We talk about anything mom related, the ups, the downs, the trends. Check us out. We are on all your streaming platforms.
And to everyone else in the audience, thank you for watching this episode of Nerds Now Playing. We'll be back next week with another review.